Hello, Planeteers. It is the weekend before Thanksgiving. And yes, there will be new comics on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Not sure if I'll record something next weekend, but maybe. I will be at LostCon at the Hilton LAX, which is a great science fiction and fantasy and horror convention. And I will be talking about comics on Sunday, the 30th. So that's from November 28th to 30th. And if you have not already, please sign up for the Kickstarter for Horror Not Hate, which is a comics anthology in which a lot of us are a bit horrified at the state of things. So, comics creators coming together to stand up against whatever is going on right now. And it seems like every day something is going on, right? So let's get to this week's comic stack. And the rules are these are comics that I have bought at House of Secrets in Burbank. And it is kind of a justification. This was all spawned by Jim Kruger running into me at House of Secrets and asking, "Hey, what have you bought?" And I'm to justify, even though I am sometimes very much behind in books that I suspect I like, but I haven't caught up in reading them. So the rules are then that I probably read three or four that I got home and I was already caught up, and so I can pick this up, or they're number ones or something like that. Or they're such a big deal that I had to know. So if you are following comics and know there's one you can probably guess I've done. So then the rest are just why I like these books. So first up is going to be from Dynamite in DC, Harley Quinn X Elvira. I'm still not sure when we decided that X was the thing, but crosses over. I don't know. This is a kind of an all-star creators thing. It's written by Amanda Connor and Jimmy Palmiotti, who know obviously a lot about Harley Quinn. They've done some great things. Art by Amanda Connor and Juan Samu. Colors by Amanda Connor and Walter Pereira. Letters by Dave Lanphier. And edited by Joseph Rybant and Chris Conroy. And my friend David Avalone is the editorial consultant, because David writes the usual book from Dynamite. So this is fun. I actually did read this because I read the first issue because it was my friend David, as an editorial consultant. I admit, as much as I like Harley Quinn as a character, I don't really read the regular books, and I've read some of what Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor, or vice versa, Amanda Connor and Jimmy Palmiotti did with her. But I think I'm a little behind on the continuity, and I'm not sure if it matters. So, and of course, because it's a crossover, right? But Elvira fits fairly well into the Harley Quinn world, and it's involving mobsters and a twisted sense of justice and a lot of sexual innuendo. Pretty much, to my mind, if you enjoyed the movie way back in the 80s, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and I did, it's that kind of humor. It's the humor of her television show as well. So it's nice, that the character can continue as a semi-fictional character in comics, and the spirit lives on, even though Cassandra Peterson has retired from being Elvira in public. So fun stuff. Harley Quinn X Elvira. I'm hoping that this will lead to David Avalone has shared with me that he has hopes for not a sequel exactly, but another tour of duty for Elvira in the DC universe. And I love the idea. Now, actually, sometime back in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, that Elvira was featured as Elvira's House of Mystery at DC Comics. So this isn't her first rodeo in the DC universe. Anyway, definitely worth it. I also picked up I misread a press release, and I thought that this book, The Guy in the Chair from Dark Horse, was coming out in the spring. And no, that was actually, I reread the press release and it was a trade paperback. So I picked up The Guy in the Chair #2, and then thank you, House of Secrets, you still had #1. And this is by Hannah Rose May and Utkarsh Ambudkar, who Utkarsh is one of the leads on Ghosts on CBS, Paramount Plus, whichever way you watch it. Hannah Rose May was a guest actor in there. She has written some comics before as well. And it's let's see, the art is by Guillermo Sana, Derbla Kelly, and Stephen Wands. And again, if I mispronounced any of those names, please write in and correct me. Try not to be angry about it. I'm really doing the best I can. But anyway, I'm just surprised because a couple of weeks ago, Hannah Rose and Utkarsh were at the Revenge of Comics and Pinball Comics Creators Block Party signing posters, and they didn't have any copies of the book. So again, I thought, oh yeah, it's coming. I guess that just means that Revenge of it is sold out, and that's okay because there were a couple of things that Hannah Rose had that she said, no, it's just to show you what I've done because they don't have copies or I don't have any more copies. So anyway, this is interesting and it kind of fits in something that I always get a little leery of when celebrity actors, write comics. They sometimes are creating properties that are clearly for them to star in. We've seen that happen several times. This one, it is clear that Utkarsh would probably like to be the guy in the chair, and it's a spy thriller, and really well done. And I would say that the justification for him being there is that it is a very diverse property. I'd like to see this as a movie. I don't know if that's really what he and Hannah Rose have in mind, but I'd like to, I could see it. I could really see it. It was a fun, suspenseful thing. It's definitely, he's got his references, and there's a moment. He's an incredible rapper and had worked with Lin-Manuel Miranda in kind of the beginnings of what became Hamilton. So it's kind of cool. And there's a moment where he does karaoke and actually the character sings, "I'm not throwing away my shot." So, it is a little meta, but a really solid book. And that's what really matters when creating a property like this. Again, from Dark Horse, The Guy in the Chair. Okay. So next up, this is the one you probably all could have guessed that I had to take home and read, which is Batman Deadpool. This, don't be fooled, it's more than that. It's, let's see. Let me get ready for this. So much going on. The Cosmic Kiss Caper. So, like, what, a month and a half ago, there was Marvel DC's version of Deadpool meets Batman. This one's by Grant Morrison as the writer, Dan Mora as the artist, Alejandro Sanchez as colorist, Todd Klein as letterer, with Marie Javins and Andrew Marino as editors. And then there are all kinds of backups, and I'll get there. This is very much the Grant Morrison take on Batman Deadpool, and I'll be honest, just slightly. The Marvel DC one as a story worked a little better for me, even though it's an improbable crossover either way. Of course, Grant Morrison knows their stuff, and this includes using a villain that they created for New X-Men back in like 2000 for Marvel. Definitely things from their run on Batman. I don't know if they'd ever done a run with Deadpool. Honestly, that's another character where I enjoy Deadpool, and every comic I've read every comic I've read with Deadpool, I have enjoyed. I just haven't always followed the character that closely. And this also brings back the Amalgam universe and characters there. There is a piece of the old Bill Finger and Jerry Sprang Batman stuff, but also kind of a semi-sequel, or at least plot threads from Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man way back when. So I think that's why I probably think that the Marvel DC one works a little better for the casual fan or the someone who's come into Deadpool and Batman through the movies or television properties, etc. Whereas this is definitely the one for hardcore comics fans, and I enjoyed it. But the other thing I would say is that I think that the backups, which were all little side crossovers, work better here than they were fun in the Marvel DC one, but they were just they were jokes. This is not. This is John Constantine Hellblazer and Doctor Strange by James Tynion IV, Joshua Williamson and Scott Snyder. Hayden Sherman is the artist, Mike Spicer is the colorist, and Frank Jvetikovic. I apologize. Frank Jvetikovic, letterer. It's a solid what happens when Constantine, sorry, because it's the blonde one. That's Constantine. Constantine meets Doctor Strange. Again, kind of makes sense. Then there's a Nightwing and Laura Kinney Wolverine by Tom Taylor, Bruno Redondo, Adriano Lucas, and Wes Abbott. And I like it because it actually does a really great job of drawing the parallel between how Nightwing's kind of family dynamics are similar to Laura Kinney's the Wolverine family, which I barely was aware that like a whole family has sprung up, and but it's cool. Harley Quinn and the Incredible Hulk, it was just fun. Mariko Tamaki, who was fun. Amanda Connor, here there she is again. Tamara Bonvillain, who I mentioned as colorist before, and Dave Sharp as letterer. It's a fun story. Harley Quinn stories when she meets other characters are just kind of wacko anyway. I thought interestingly, and I'm not sure how the setting was supposed to work perfectly, but Static and Ms. Marvel with G. Willow Wilson returning to Ms. Marvel, and maybe she's done that more recently. I don't know. Dennis Cohen as penciler. He was one of the co-creators of Static. Klaus Janson, inker. So this is a classic art team. Love seeing that. This book is more of a love letter to the comics fans, but with some new characters, and I really appreciate that. Francesco Segala is the colorist, and Steve Wands again is the letterer. So had fun with this book. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think this might be though the one that I'm going to reread again, which often happens with Grant Morrison, because I know I've read through and I've missed something, and they're always worth a second read. So, Batman Deadpool, and I'm pretty sure that your local shop is still going to have this because they must have overordered this. There were so many variant covers, and I don't usually really care about such things, but, I get it. That's part of the comic shop or the comics industry economy right now. I'm not sure how healthy that is. That kind of drove the speculation boom in the 90s, but look, I'm not running companies. I'm not the one doing this. I'm just the guy buying. So I just buy the books to read the stories. And rarely, other than I admit it, Marvel suckered me in with the Disney covers for, for books that had classic X-Men covers and Avengers covers with Mickey Mouse, Goofy, and Donald, and all of those ilk. It was, I bought some of them. My favorite being What If Goofy Were the Incredible Hulk. I liked it. But, oddly enough, those covers were almost all issues of Spider-Man, which was just weird to me. Anyway, so I think I mentioned before Space Ghost by David Pepos and Stanley Lau? Jonathan Lau. Andrew Dahlhaus is colorist. Taylor Esposito is letterer. Francesco Mattina did the cover that I have. Joseph Rybent is the editor. I admit that Michael Cho's covers were the ones that really drew me into this series in the first place, but now again, I switched shops, and sometimes my previews orders kind of drop a little. I make mistakes. So I think Michael Cho is just like the first season, if you will, of Space Ghost. I liked them because it felt like a throwback to Gold Key comics. And yeah, I'm old enough that's how I encountered, one of the ways I encountered Space Ghost, just the Big Little Book, etc. So, yeah, I'll probably mention Big Little Books a lot when that's appropriate. I know I talked about that last week with Aquaman. There's a row of Big Little Books behind me. Perhaps you can see some of them. Aquaman and Space Ghost, the Sorceress of Cyba 3 is up there. Anyway, I enjoy this book. I did not read this issue yet. I think I'm one issue behind. And full disclosure, as I will often name drop, some of these creators I know and I like them, and sometimes that's why I buy them. But in this case, yes, I like David Pepos, but I also think he's doing a hell of a job on Space Ghost. So Captain America by number 5 here. Let's see, by Chip Zdarsky. Artist is Valerio Schiti. Color artist is Frank Martin, and the letterer is Joe Caramagna. Here it is, Captain America number 5. And actually, on the 4th of July weekend is when I went by House of Secrets and picked up number 1. I don't necessarily know why I was inspired to pick that up, except I like Chip Zdarsky, and I thought, okay, they're starting Captain America over again. And I've read the first 2 issues and really, really like them. And I think, this is, again, a lot of Marvel writers would have done right by the timing of this, which is Captain America stands for the best of what we're supposed to be, and we're not necessarily seeing the best of what we're supposed to be. What Zdarsky has done is place Cap, go back into that time, like shortly after he woke from the ice, and of course, which now is the early 2000s and not the 1964 as it was in the original Avengers. So the time period when Steve Rogers is trying to find his place in the modern world before becoming the leader of the Avengers. And so it's kind of interesting, and the storyline is called Our Secret Wars, and so it's really getting with the Middle East and what about his patriotism and sense of duty in the 40s. What does that do when matched with people who consider themselves patriots in the military in the early 2000s in a war that is not as clear cut as what World War II was? And I'll still stand by. I think World War II was fairly clear cut. There was goodish and evil, and we knew clearly who evil was. And so I enjoy the inspiration of it and the thought going on behind it. And so I really like this. Again, a little behind, but I know I'm going to enjoy it. This is the book that I like almost the most, and yet it often confuses me a bit. This is New Gods number 12. I think this may be, I may actually be caught up and be able to read this weekend. By Ram V is the writer. Evan Cagle is the artist for some of the pages. Phil Hester is some of the pages. Andy Parks does the inks over Phil Hester. Evan Cagle inks himself. Francesco Segala is the color artist. Tom Napolitano is the letterer, and Dustin Nguyen and Carl Kerschel and Nimit Malavia are some of the variant covers. James Reed is the assistant editor. Ben Mears and Rob Levin are editors. Ben Mears, isn't that the guy who fought against Barlow in Salem's Lot? I have to think about that. Anyway, so the New Gods. And what I really like about this is this is the first time that it's truly felt to me like this is moving beyond what Jack Kirby established with the Fourth World, or this is the logical next, is there's kind of a fifth world coming. And I know that, this is again tying into the whole, all in the DCKO, all these things, the absolute universe, all the status quo of there. So it's kind of necessary. Darkseid has fallen. What do they do when a new race is making an incursion? And the new gods, if you will, are trying to figure out where do they belong, or are the new gods going to take over? So this is a key issue, and I think this is the last issue of this. It will return somewhere else, as this is also part of the market. You do about 12 issues and you go, great, we've got a couple of trade paperbacks. There's going to be a new number one down the road. I think that some of this, is worth jumping on board regardless, because we know that in the DC cinematic universe, there's better. The DCU, there on film and television, there is going to be a Mr. Miracle animated series, which is based on the famous the Eisner-winning maxi series by Tom King, and I am blanking on the artist for that, and I apologize. I'm sure someone's going to scream at me, and that's fine. Anyway, so it's worth picking up, and this is just a little more thought provoking. And Ram V has also brought in the Forever People, which has always been a concept that I admit I don't think I've read any of the actual original books issues by Kirby of the Forever People, but otherwise there's New Gods and Mr. Miracle obviously tied in. But I always get intrigued when the Forever People are involved. So it's cool. Anyway, digging that. Lazarus Fallen by Greg Rucka, Michael Lark, and colors by Santiago Arcas, letters by Ariana Mayer. And I don't know who the editor is, but that's okay. Michael Lark, Lazarus Fallen. I am a little bit behind, so I'm actually kind of like building this big stack of them. I read the first issue, enjoyed it, so I have 2, 3, 4, 5, all stacked together, so I can just go through. And here's 6, so that would be the first arc. This is historically a book that gives me a little bit of the chills, but I appreciate that Ruckus and Lark have done their research. This is one kind of logical extrapolation of where we might be 30, 40 years ago from now. I cannot remember exactly how far in the future this is, but Rucka is often inspired by news stories and science stories, breakthroughs that, he goes, well, what's the dark side of that? How might billionaires twist this? And so Lazarus is about, certain families rule regions, wealthy, billionaire, maybe by this point, trillionaire class families. And then they have one, I think, family member, person who thinks they're a family member, who are essentially immortal. The Lazaruses, they are the warriors, the protectors, and a lot of technology is embedded in them to be invincible. So it's an interesting book. I admit I picked up, I don't know why I gestured back there, none of you can see it, but I have the big hardcover version collections of Lazarus sitting there, so I got to reread this at this point. I'm not sure if the hardcovers have what they used to. He's not with the Lazarus Fallen. He used to actually include citations to news articles, if you wanted to know what was scaring him and keeping him up at night. This Lazarus Fallen does not seem to be doing that, and I don't know if the collections do or not, but if you can track down original individual issues of the first Lazarus series, you're in for a treat and a chill. Justice League Red, we've been here before. That's what I feel is. This is, I can't remember what it is. Saladin Ahmed, who's very solid. Clayton Henry on the art. Arif Prianto, hi-fi. I'm not sure. And David Barron are colors. Lucas Gattoni is letters. And the assistant editor is James Reed. Editor is Kathleen Wisniewski. And Paul Kaminsky is the group editor. So, there's a big family of Justice League books. This is kind of the special task force. That's what the book was called before. Justice League Task Force. In that case, I think it was Martian Manhunter put together. This is back in the 90s after you had Justice League International, Justice League, the Bwahaha era, if you will. And then it got strangely serious. And Marvel kind of countered with, Secret Defenders. It might have been Secret Avengers too. This is where my knowledge, at a time when I actually couldn't afford to buy that many comics, was coming up. But anyway, this is Justice League Red, issue number 4. Red Tornado is the one putting a team together to take care of things that the probabilities he's predicted. Guest starring Deadman. No matter how improbable, I always enjoy a Deadman cameo. So, but I'm in there because I just love Justice League. I love getting the bang for your buck of, like, you buy one book and you have 6 or 7 characters, at least 5 of whom you absolutely love, beyond creating like a Batman family or a Superman family. I love the variety. But here, Mark Waid, Adrian Gutierrez, and Norm Rapman inking and finishing. Tamer Bonvillain, she gets around. She's a very good colorist. Steve Wands is letterer, and let's see, the associate editor is Chris Rosa, and Paul Kaminsky is the editor. This is Batman Superman World's Finest. So this is close to, kind of that. You get a lot of bang for your buck. And I dig that, Mark Waid has kind of used this to go back to early days of the Batman Superman relationship, and he's kind of subtly rewriting some continuity or recreating some continuity, which he can because he wrote the new history of the DC universe, and we just now know that, like, oh, the last reboot, everybody knows it was a reboot, and now this is how the history was. Again, I don't know how any person logically would exist in that universe without going barking mad. But, it's fiction, it's fantasy, and they're superheroes, and it's fun. So I should probably not think too hard. And this would be, I hear my first wife turning to me and saying, "You're thinking too much, Macaw." So I am. Anyway, I love this book though, but I'm not caught up. So the Ultimates, I have this is the Ultimates number 18. We're 6 issues away from the end of the Ultimate Universe, but and that's okay. The writer is Dennis Camp. The artist is Juan Frigeri. Letterer is Travis Lanham, and the assistant editor is Michelle Marchesi. Editor is Will Moss, and of course, the editor in chief of Marvel is C.B. Cebulski. I've mentioned before, I like the Ultimate books. I don't read Ultimate Black Panther. I gave it a shot, a couple issues, and was like, yeah, it wasn't necessarily doing it for me. That doesn't mean it wouldn't have done it for you. You know, it's just me. I didn't feel this urge to be a completist. I tried all these Ultimates. I had Ultimate Wolverine for a while too, and despite loving the creative team on that, it's not necessarily grabbed me. You know, so I accept that. But the Ultimates, again, by the rules, right? Team book, variant editions of the Avengers, essentially, and it's kind of cool. And again, if you're just tuning in, what the Ultimate Universe is doing is that a month passes between issues, so we're always playing a little catch up, and we know there's a ticking clock coming down to the Maker reappearing in this universe, this Earth that they messed with, and so it is going to expire by logic. Just as I don't know how over at DC they plan to keep the Absolute Universe going. They say they're going to, but it also feels like that has an end game in mind. We'll see. But Ultimates definitely has an end game. That was very shocking to people, but I kind of appreciate that you build this in because it's not what it used to be, where people thought that like, oh, your readership rotates out every 7 years. But I think that you got to keep it fresh, and probably the best way to keep it fresh is just tell fresh stories, and it's maybe not always with the same characters, and you move on. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these versions of characters popped up in the regular Marvel universe, or we'd get one shots every now and then, partially to maintain trademarks. This is the reality. There are books that happen that way, and then we are very lucky when they turn out to be really good, which does occasionally happen. So over here, Superman Unlimited. This is, I'm showing Dan Slott just kind of playing in the DC universe. He plotted this one. Jeremy Adams, who is all over the DC universe, did the dialogue. Artist is Lucas Meyer. Colorist is Marcello Maiolo. Letterer is Dave Sharp. Assistant editor is Gillian Grant. Editor is Paul Kaminsky. And I just like this. Almost feels like it's its own continuity, but it's sort of loosely attached to the rest of what's happening in the Superman books. But it's not as directly going into the DCKO and the All In. It just says All In, So I like that. Like each of the Superman books right now has something different going on. So like I think it's an Action. Okay, don't quote me. One of them is by Mark Waid, which is going back and saying what Superboy was like, and that's kind of fun. Although I admit it. Look, Mark Waid can get mad at me later. I'm not a big fan of what he did with Captain Comet, but I don't think Captain Comet has ever been treated very well past the secret society of supervillains back in the 70s, and that is old man fanboy being cranky. Okay, but then what's happening in the other Superman book is this is more along the lines, this is tying into the DCKO and all that stuff. But, we'll see. So anyway, Superman Unlimited. I love that this is Dan Slott's triumphant return to the DC universe. And I think it just came out, and if you haven't, read his Arkham Asylum miniseries, which was one of his first projects. And then he went over to Marvel, and he kind of connected better at that time with Marvel readership than with DC readership. But that Arkham Asylum book was terrific. I got it was maybe a little too quirky for what DC readers wanted at that time, but it was good stuff. So enjoy. Absolute Flash. I have, of course, at number 9, I have talked about my love of the Absolute Universe, even though this one is, this is the book that to me feels closest to the main universe, Flash, except I got to say, I've been using the DC Infinite app and reading Flash occasionally, catching up. There's some weird crap going on in there. And by weird, I mean, like, yeah, they are really pushing the hard science with Wally, and I'm not sure of all the reasoning, the character development that has gotten to them to this point. But it's a book that hurts my head in the right ways, which is, opening my imagination. And I guess that's why I feel this is almost too similar, because yeah, there's some really interesting concepts going here. I think the regular Flash book was covering these things too a bit, although at least Wally West here has not discovered the Speed Force yet. This is Jeff Lemire is the writer, Nick Robles is the artist and cover artist, Adriano Lucas is the colors, and Tom Napolitano is lettering. Who's the group editor? Katie Kubert, and senior editor Andrew Marino, and Ash Padilla, assistant editor, with Chris Conroy, executive editor. I'm not sure why all those. And I've talked about this one too before. Nocturnals, The Sinister Path. Dan Brereton, I think it's probably just Dan. Lettered by Lois Buhalis, and editor is Patrick Thorpe, and assistant editor Tara McCarran. I dig the characters because I like monsters, and obviously because I support almost every book out of Shannon Eric Denton's Monster Forge Productions, not just because he's a friend, but because I've dug every book he's done. Dan Brereton is kind of the same. I like the feel of the art. I've loved the Nocturnals, the makeup of this team, which kind of came from a time when like every publisher was releasing new super teams all at once. And there was a time in the 90s where they were trying to create different, their own connected universe. It was too much, but the Nocturnals was one that really, saved my time, which I note, by the way, from that Dark Horse, which had Comics Greatest World, one of their most successful characters from that time, an omnibus just came out this week of Ghost. I highly recommend that, the Dark Horse version of Ghost, and to pick up that trade or that omnibus, I guess, because it's pretty thick. I would have bought it, except I already have every issue somewhere in my garage. So, that's it this week. Again, I remind you, please, support horror, not hate, if you can, and if you are so inclined, and support your local comic shop if you can. I hope you have a local comic shop, and if not, use comicshoplocator.com and find one. They are what's keeping this industry alive, even though like obviously with Horror Not Hate, we've got Kickstarter, which is part of the economy of it now, and it's all shaking out. But I love going to my shop, House of Secrets, but also visiting others to see, like, well, what did I miss, or what didn't I find, because they either it's a local creator. Like, I love going to other cities and saying, oh, like San Diego, there are creators that have little indie books that they're only putting in shops. And a few weeks ago at LA Comic Con, I found this book Limerence that I think is only available in 2 shops in the Bay Area, but the writer artist had a table, so I bought his first issue and went, yeah, pretty cool stuff, and I'd like to see that get a wider audience. So, if there's a book that you love that I am missing, and yes, I have friends like Chuck Surface who will tell me, oh, you missed this one, is great, and I'll catch up on other ways. So, if there's one, let me know. editor@fanboyplanet.com. And that's it. Like I said, definitely will be going to the shop on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Don't know what's coming in, but I will look forward to that. And if I have time during LostCon, I'll record a stack. I'll take the bag with me. What the heck, and we'll deal with it. So, thank you. And remember, use your powers for good.